Hello, I am Danielle Spagnolo, and I'm going to be presenting my case study. The BCPS stands for Baltimore City Public Schools. Sorry, that's my dog if you hear him in the background. And it's the commitment to transforming student life, and that's a document that I based my project off of, and then found policies from there. So the policy summary, like I said, that's the document I used. There was a lot of push to revitalize the school district around 2007. So a nonprofit put together a team of people that did some research into what is actually going wrong. And then from 2007 to 2013, there was some progress. So they decided to revamp the document and then do it from 2013 and beyond. So if it's kind of following the same cycle, then we'll probably see another one around 2020, around that time. So from this document, there was three major ways to kind of turn around the school system. One was to use Common Core standards, which I'm not really going to touch on just because I have my own feels about that and they don't really have to do with this project. So then the second one was getting better teacher quality. And it was really a policy priority, which I'll talk about how they implement a priority in the policy system. And then the third is to actually get better school buildings physically. And from that came the Baltimore City Schools Revitalization Act of 2013. And from that came the 21st century school buildings policy. And I'll look at that policy and then look at the policy priority from the better teacher quality. So a brief history really doesn't need to be too explained to this crowd because you kind of know what's going on. Obviously, the Baltimore City Public Schools has had a lot of trouble with graduation rates, funding, and test scores. Why is this happening? Obviously, institutional racism and income inequality. I know that we all read Brown in Baltimore by Howell S. Baum. That was in Education Week. And he kind of really touched on how Baltimore completely failed to integrate populations of black and white children into joining the same classrooms in 1954. So from there, we kind of had this separate and unequal school system, and this kind of just ferments and has been for the last however many years. The school system keeps on emphasizing choice in education, which really just kind of means white flight. So a lot of white families will leave and join private, charter, whatever schools. And then the Baltimore City public school system is left with more and more children that are not being funded with, proper property taxes that are ending up funding the schools now because of a lot of cuts that are happening, and we've also kind of read about that. So the solutions to a lot of problems in the past have been cutting funding in order to kind of maintain some sort of school building so that kids can go in and go out. But kids aren't actually graduating, they're not doing good at test scores, and a lot of problems are still happening. So their solution was to create the portfolio strategy. This was really emphasized by Dr. Alonso, who was this guy from, I think, Wisconsin that came in and decided to implement this strategy as opposed to the traditional strategy, which is to not enter any charter or magnet schools into a system. Now, in Baltimore specifically, they have to also follow the rules of Maryland. So a charter school isn't completely separate from the Baltimore City public school system. They're still within the same system, meaning the teachers who teach for charter schools ultimately teach for Baltimore City public schools as far as pay, and if they wanted to go on a waiting list or if they couldn't find a job, then they would be paid for by the city school system if they were working for a charter school, just like somebody who's working for a Baltimore district school. So this portfolio strategy has worked for some kids because there is a lottery you can enter and you can ultimately kind of gamble and win your education, which is a huge problem and a lot of the reason why the test scores are so low. There was also an Carl L. Schmoke, I should probably say, kind of backtracking a little bit, was the mayor at the time who decided to give all parents the option to pull their kid out of poorly run schools and place them in schools where they believe their children will get a better education. And that kind of like just rolls into this strategy of like, oh, well, this isn't working, so like let's just make a new one and a new one and a new one and not have any boundaries of where kids can go to school. But what's happening is releasing some of these boundaries legally doesn't really release the boundaries that a lot of like high poverty residencies face. They don't have the same resources and they can't send their kid across town to go to a school that is perceived as better. So there really needs to be more just priority on every school in general to achieve real equity, and not like separate equality or whatever is happening right now with the lottery system. So I'll focus on that. I just think it's important to kind of see what Baltimore City public school systems mean. That's why I kind of went on that route before I look into better teachers and better buildings. So as far as my literature review goes for better teachers, there was kind of a cultural shift in the 90s. The person or the group that could be responsible for it, I mean, it could just be a natural cultural shift, but Great Schools and Great Kids campaign that was based out of Oakland, California in 1999 really lifted the responsibility from failing students off of their shoulders and put it onto teachers. So every time that a student would do bad in school, they were saying, okay, well, like, let's look at the teaching methods and what's happening in our system. And is that the reason why kids are failing? Because kids are naturally bright, and it's kind of taking the responsibility and shifting it to the setup that kids are facing. So when that happened, there was a big shift in investigation. So students weren't the only ones that were asked to get report cards anymore. Teachers were and schools were. So Baltimore City Public Schools has been asked to implement school report cards, and they have done so. They've done so weakly, I will say, or poorly. So they have annual report cards. The setup of them is a complete travesty to the layman's eye. If you don't understand statistics, it's really not something that's easily read. On top of that, their statistics per school actually doesn't exist. They just put the different name of each school on the top of the document, and then they have district-wide statistics that they put on the right-hand side, and they don't have anything broken down by department or teacher. So it's kind of, if you really wanted to discover what's happening and where the weakness of the school is going, it's not readable and you can't see it. So the school report card is kind of a lost cause, I think, unless they completely redo the way that their statistics are done. I don't think it's a really good way of finding out where the weak parts of our school system are. There have been some successes of being a really high poverty school and actually being able to turn out kids that have good test scores, great graduation rates, etc. And one of those schools is in Nassau County, New York. They break down their high performance ratings in the following ways. One, they have teaching staff that is career driven based on their student potential. So just basically teachers that really, really care about their students, and that's why they go to work in the morning. Two, instruction is the highest priority and is placed in front of any other tasks. So they're actually able to, all the maintenance that teachers have to do and all of these surveys are all second to what is really important, and that's the actual teaching day. Three, a major cultural focus is to support other teachers, which I think is really lacking in Baltimore City public school system, and I'll touch on that later. And then four, they closely monitor and implement strategy based on what causes success and what is rooted in failure. So they really want to know what works and what doesn't, and they throw out what doesn't work and they keep what does work. Since we don't have a way of knowing what doesn't work, that is also a snowballing effect of like, okay, so then we keep these strategies and then they stay, and then our graduation rates stay low, and it's kind of not a surprise why we're still in this rut. So that's my literature review on what it means for a policy priority to kind of implement better teachers, and then I'll go into better buildings. So There's been a national construction trend when it comes to school buildings. I know that during Safety Week, we touched on having, like, there's kind of just this timeline where the bridges are falling and the infrastructure that was put in place hasn't been taken care of proactively over time. So because of that, everything is sort of falling apart and there's a lot of construction happening in general. The same thing is going to schools. And because it is actually makes such a difference on how student test scores are performed, it's 17 percentile points based on if a kid is in a really poorly, like, dilapidating, completely falling apart school versus a good quality school, maybe with like a science lab and all of those things. These vague kind of good school or bad school haven't been barriers that have been set, but you can just kind of see that some of Baltimore City schools are actually falling apart. So there's 17 percentile points at stake here. That it means a lot to the kids' future, especially in a results-based program, which is what Baltimore City has. So from this Better Buildings Act that I had mentioned earlier came the 21st Century Buildings for Our Schools for Our Kids policy. And that's the policy that I'm going to be looking at and having the interview with later. This policy really just kind of gives a 10-year plan for about 26 schools to be vacated completely and like completely demolished, and then they rebuild these schools over a span of 10 years. They're kind of transferring kids from school to school in between this time so that like they have somewhere to go. But it's funny because in this policy, like, I took out the dash now portion because I'm not sure if that's very accurate, because 10 years from now it is a completely different generation of kids, so it's really not now. But it's like as soon as I guess policymakers can do. They've got about like 20 million to work on this project, and I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's actually not that much money when you consider building 26 schools. So it's something that's definitely a real challenge, and I'll talk to Tina Hike Hubbard, who's the vice chair of the school committee later, and she mentions further insight on that topic. Sorry, that's my dog again. His name is Remy. Anyways, okay, so then we talked in Safety Week about this whole rebuilding versus proactive planning thing, and it was the aging infrastructure article that I remember talking about it with, where it's like you really don't get funding unless the building project becomes so big and so overwhelming and so severe that it then becomes this priority, and that's when we can get tons of money. Instead of doing these small maintenance project over time, it's easier to get funding when it's a complete rebuild, and that's like a real problem when it's coming to kids, because not only is there now lack of stability because they're being transferred from school to school, but there's lack of like actual stability like in their buildings. So because we know what it can do to their percentile points, what it can do to their psyche in general of like not having this stability, it's really concerning when the priority is to wait until it's so bad that it could fall down at any moment. So that's a real problem. But that's my literature review on the Better School Buildings. So community engagement happened in a couple of ways. I had an interview with Tina Hike Hubbard, the vice chair of Baltimore City School of Commissioners, and then I did a session that I thought was available to the public, and it halfway was, with the Baltimore City Public School Teaching and Learning Committee meeting. So I actually, the first one meeting was supposed to only last like 2.5 hours, lasted 3, much longer than that. And the interview with Tina was supposed to be a phone interview. I had waited for like 2 weeks to receive a phone call from her, and kind of kept on emailing, and the woman is very, very busy, so we kind of just compromised with an email interview, and so we went back and forth for a while until I got what I needed. The interview with Tina mostly talked about building and the policy that was the 21st century learning opportunities and school rebuilding project. Like I said, it's a 10-year plan. The good news was that she actually, the good news is that she actually said the first project has already gone underway, so that's fantastic. Kind of changing this, oh, this is sort of our plan that could happen in the future, to it's happening right now and we can see ground broken. Um, the other thing that made me happy that she mentioned was they actually did include the community in the planning sessions that took place on the actual structure of the buildings. I'm not sure how much the community say had to do with what actually was implemented. She didn't put that in there in the email, but I mean, I would hope that they were taken into account. They came up with these cooperative use spaces, which is just kind of another way of saying like a multi-purpose room. So like a dance class could be there, as well as like a drama group could be there, as well as a community meeting can be held there later on, and an art gallery. These use spaces are supposed to kind of be not only like all encompassing, but kind of like this new word for a space is gonna kind of inspire a way to have more after school programs and have this feasibility that can actually happen by having a room that is for specifically that. So hopefully more after school programs can be better quality and be a thing, and that is what the cooperative use space is for. She ended the email, which kind of lasted like 2 or 3 email sessions, and she ended it by saying they really want to just create fantastic 21st century learning opportunities for our children. I'm really sorry, my dog keeps barking. He doesn't like when I don't pay attention to him. But anyways, yeah, so they really want to create these fantastic learning opportunities, and they link to like physical or like space-based, which is kind of something that we've talked about this semester. Production into also like intellectual production, and these things definitely like coincide, so it's nice to see that this is a new opportunity for policymakers to kind of combine what effects can happen from children just by having a space to call their own and that they can be proud of. So it was a pretty, I wish I had gotten some more insight from her, to be honest. I definitely felt like a lot of her responses came out of like a policy planning book, especially because it was over email. I wish that she had time to talk to me over the phone, but it's just something that in general, I want to know more about. How did this policy actually become a priority? The thing that's really concerning for me is that asbestos was never mentioned in the 21st century learning opportunities, because they talk about rebuilding all these new schools and vacating 26. So we're vacating 26 schools, and I can see that they're sort of falling apart, but it's not like to the point where, buildings, maybe it is to the point where ceilings can actually collapse, but the thing that is really concerning is there probably is asbestos in there. In 2007, they got in a lot of trouble. Baltimore City Public Schools had to fix about $300,000 worth of damages where there was evidence of asbestos to keep it up to code. Unfortunately, this year they found asbestos in Lansdowne, which is Baltimore County, who also used, a similar amount of money to keep their school up to code. So they found asbestos in 2016 in, a school nearby, and there's no evidence to say that there isn't also problems with Baltimore City Public Schools still having asbestos in it. I actually think that that's probably like some reason for completely vacating a space rather than kind of rebuilding, or maybe vacating the space because of what we had talked about earlier with rebuilding versus proactive planning is the only way to do it. I'm not sure. But the fact that asbestos is not mentioned at all maybe is good for their PR, but to me, knowing that there's so much asbestos in the city, it's kind of distrusting, and I kind of wish that they had mentioned, even if there was none, to guarantee that there was none, something about it. But yeah, that's my interview with Tina. The Baltimore City Public School Teaching and Learning Committee meeting was on Wednesday, April 27th. Like I said, it was supposed to only be 2.5 hours, lasted way longer than that. They do have it live on TV, so you can watch it. They live stream it. But and they allow public to go in there, but they don't allow for public comment. So I actually learned this because I had a question. I raised my hand after they said any questions, and I was like completely like not noticed at all. And I had somebody like come up to me on the side and said, "Oh, there's no public comment allowed here," which I kind of think is ridiculous because yes, I'm not like a parent or a student, so I mean, I guess mine has lower priority because I'm just researching. But I will say, if I was a parent or if I was a student going to a teaching and learning committee meeting that's open to the public, I would hope that what I have to say matters. So I think that should change. Um, but it started off with fine arts director who was talking about all these different programs, utilizing MICA and small businesses to have an arts culture in Baltimore that was extending beyond the Baltimore City Public Schools. Also, that's kind of, in my opinion, I think it's great. I think it's awesome. But it just kind of sucks that the funding is that bad where, you have to reach out to other entities in order to get some sort of program. To keep in mind, like, the reason why there are dance programs is, like, kind of solely because of MICA and, like, because of small businesses. So, like, it's because out of the kindness of the neighbors that they're able to get by. But if they didn't have those partnerships, they just straight up wouldn't happen. And that's really concerning. The presentation of stats is completely results based, completely. So if there really was not one presentation that happened during that entire meeting that did not have statistics, which I think is good and important so that there's like this, non-subjective way of presenting something. But that being said, it kind of can be subjective because you can make data say whatever you want it to. And I saw that present in this meeting. They divided each stat, no matter what department it came from, whether it be special education or the literacy programs. They did male and then female, and then they did black, Hispanic, and white, and that's how they divided up their stats. I had a real problem with their lack of accountability for why the English as a second language and Hispanic students were doing so poorly. There's only 8% of them in the population. There's 8% Spanish or Hispanic and then I think almost equally 8% white kids, and then the rest of the percentage is black. So from these percentages, they would say, okay, so the reason why the English as a second language students are doing, really poorly, like, it's really bad, to be honest. It is, like, their graduation rates are a travesty. And the overall graduation rates for Baltimore City schools was, I think, 69%, which is really bad compared to the overall average of Maryland, which I'm almost positive is like 87% or 80 something percent. So it's a lot of percentage difference, and these percents matter. And when they say, okay, well, we don't have as many Hispanic students and their graduation rates are disproportionately lower than even the average, and they're saying, oh, well, there's not that many of them, so, like, that's the reasoning why, or that's okay. It's so disgusting to hear that. That did not come from all the teachers. It came from the director of research for the Baltimore City Public Schools, which was just, like, this, like, old white dude who, like, definitely, like, I don't know much about him, but all I know is that, like, he got a lot of flack that particular meeting with the way that he presented his stats, and I'm also a critic of the way he presents his stats. So there was a lot of people that were asking for more information of the actual curriculum, the department, like, hey, can you give me percentages based on school year? Can you give me percentages based on, is this math, science, like, where's the weak point? So he definitely, it was kind of like a public, like, people like really went at him, and I kind of applaud them because it was a real problem. Positive moments that happened, of course, there were those. There was testimonies from, teachers that had personal meetings with students that are having to deal with real life problems, that are having to make the decision, do I graduate high school or do I feed my child? So I'm going to go to work. A lot of the times they'll have kids graduate from a bridge-based program. There's a plethora of programs. There's like Peel, which is literacy. There's another one that like conducts studies for if they're ready to go to college. It's absolutely amazing how many programs there are. But they'll say like, yeah, so I'm having to decide between these really hard life decisions. There was another teacher who kind of accounted for students finding real difficulty with transitioning from specifically middle school to high school, because there was a lot of structure in middle school and there's a lot of lack of structure in high school, and there's a lot of fear, when they enter high school because of that lack of structure. So there was a lot of like cool testimonies that came to account, but a lot of it was just like, thank you for the insight. And then like when it came to like real deliberation, it was always about the statistics. The results-based method of this like teaching and learning committee meeting, I don't think is working. I think there needs to be something else done. I don't think stats should be taken out of it. But like I said, the way that they're presenting stats now is not in a way that's helpful. So the conclusion to my project is really the school mentality right now is, I actually cannot tell you what it is, to be honest. It's kind of in just complete chaos, but I think it should just be like, we're as strong as our weakest link. The way of like, okay, we have this option, we have this option, we have this option, we have this program, we have this program. It's an overwhelming amount of help that's happening, and it's not overarching the schools in a cohesive way. And to be honest, it's just not working. I'm sure it's working for some kids, and like there's some, star stories every once in a while, but for the vast majority, when you hear that the graduation rates have actually dropped from last year to this year, it's obviously not working. We need to investigate teacher methods further. I mean, like I said before, it needs to be based on subject. We need to see what actual specific teachers are doing, so that this policy priority of having better teachers can be something that policy makers understand in a way that's based on statistics. And from there, I think there should be a all hands on deck approach. Like, policymakers should not have nothing to do with the teaching. When I talked to Tina Hay Hubbard, I originally wanted to speak to her about both policies. She did say like, this is a policy priority, like we prioritize this, but I would feel more comfortable just talking about the buildings. And she said that she just like that wasn't her responsibility, and it was very like, this is not my responsibility, so like talk to the CEO. And I'm sure that there's reasons for that, probably legal. I mean, interviewing for some graduate student, like I'm sure that there's reasons for it, but I will say that there should be like an overarching common knowledge of what kind of teaching methods are in place, and then that's just kind of another testament to why it's not working. There might not be one. And then all hands on, or not all hands on deck, I'm sorry, I just talked about that. The collaborative forum would be one that includes more student comment. So I'm appreciative of the testimonies that were taking place during the actual committee meeting, but they were kind of just like these lighthearted like anecdotes to the real statistics that was being talked about. So I think these forums should be held. I don't know whether it be like semi-annually or quarterly, but students should be a part of it. And I don't want to say like, oh, it's up to the kids to fix it, but like, their insight should be valued because they're the ones whose future is at stake here. So, if Baltimore City Public Schools really want to have like great kids and great schools, then they should actually ask the kids what they need. And then as far as just like the building policies go, I mean, I had researched a little bit because I was in the other group earlier about Port Covington, and like, I'm sure that project is going to shoot up in no time. And this whole like policy like term now really means 10 years, because that's the policy planning session, but the document literally says like 21st century schools now, but now doesn't mean now. So there really should be more priority than there already is, because there shouldn't be any other major construction projects happening unless our kids are taken care of. So there's really just like a lot of lack of priority. There's also like a lot of positivity happening. So there's definitely hope. It's just kind of, there needs to be some other methods than what's being done. And I think some of my suggestions may help. I'm not sure, but based on what I've learned this semester, that's what I'm going to suggest. So thank you.